Welcome, everyone. I'm giving everyone a minute to join our weekly webinar. I see that participants are, I see the numbers increasing, many people joining for the first time, as well as see familiar names. So thank you again for returning and welcome if you're new. This is our weekly webinar series. It's meant to be an informal time with the ALS community. My name is Sabrina Paganoni. I'm the co-principal investigator of the Healy ALS Platform Trial. And today I'm here with our patient navigation team, and I'll let them introduce themselves in a minute. And now I see that we have many people on the line, so we can get started. And again, this is our weekly webinar. The point of this webinar is really to answer your questions. So feel free to send questions and type them as we go along or at the end of the short presentation. We just have a 5-minute presentation to provide updates about our enrollment process and give some other information, and then we'll take your questions live. So if we can go to the next slide. As you know, at this time, the Healy ALS platform trial is up and running and enrolling for 4 drugs. So we are testing 4 drugs at the same time in parallel in different groups of people, but sort of using the same infrastructure. This is a placebo-controlled trial with a randomization ratio of 3:1 in favor of the active drug. So that means that for every 4 people that enter the trial, 1 will go on placebo and 3 will go on active drugs. So many more people will go on active than placebo. At the end of the randomized period, which lasts 6 months, participants who complete the trial are given the option to go on active drug for sure as part of what we call the open label extension, which is a long-term study. And at this time, we are testing 4 drugs that are listed on the slide here: zilucoplan, verdiperstat, CNM-Au8, and pridopidine. And we continue to work with other companies to add more compounds. The goal here is for the trial to be up and running for a very long time so that we can always have spots for patients. Next slide. And we're currently enrolling at 48 sites in the United States. You can find the name of the sites as well as the contact information on our website, and the link is on the slide. And if you can go to the next slide, we'll see the list of the 48 sites that are enrolling at this time. Next slide. So as recently announced, we passed the 50% enrollment mark, and that's very exciting for us. We also started to transition the first few participants to open label extension because they completed the placebo-controlled period. Next slide. And to give you more granular updates, as of today, over 300 people with ALS signed informed consent to participate in the trial, and over 200 are currently receiving investigational product, active or placebo, as part of this trial. Next slide. And here is what I'm really excited about, that we have a patient navigation team that is available not only during the webinar once a week with me, but also all the time by email and phone, and then can provide information about everything you need to know about the trial, from eligibility criteria, which are also available online, general information about the trial, and any personalized attention you may need as you have questions about the trial. And so with that, I would like to have Catherine and Alison introduce themselves. Really, they are our, they're always available to answer your questions. Catherine?
So hello, everybody. I am always excited when I get a phone call and people say they know me from these webinars. So to those I've spoken to, hello, nice to see you. And to those who haven't called that number, send an email to that address there. I'm kind of the woman behind that communication chain. So if you have any questions about the trial, I'll try to answer them in between these weekly calls. If I don't know the answer, I'm work directly with Dr. Paganoni and Dr. Sidkowitz, so I can always move the question up the chain if I don't know the answer.
I'm Allison, and I'm so excited to be part of this patient navigation team. And Sabrina, if it's okay with you, can I share a little bit about what we do as a patient navigation team?
That would be great.
Okay, wonderful. So I know from my personal experience that no matter where you are in the process, navigating your way through this journey is extremely difficult. And on one hand, it feels like there's so much information, it's overwhelming. And on the other hand, it seems like you can't find the information that you need. So what patient navigation really does is just help you through wherever you are. And while we're part of the Healy trial, and we're focused on the Healy trial, and we're experts on the Healy trial and navigating your way through that, we're happy to help in any way we can. For those of you who have reached out to other organizations, you know, organizations such as NEALS or IMALS, excuse me, they also have patient navigators, and we all work in collaboration. We are all trying to be as synergistic as possible and to help people. So there's no question that you can't ask. If we don't know the answer, we'll refer you to somebody that hopefully can answer that question for you. And I know you see our email and our phone number. I try to put it out there on social media when there's some confusion about things, or you see it on our website, please use it. Catherine loves when her phone rings. We love to be able to give you information, and whatever your question is, please don't hesitate to reach out, because I want to assure you that we're all working together throughout all of these patient advocacy organizations, and we're happy to help.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you both. And we can move to the next slide. So the idea of weekly webinars is really part of this idea of partnering with the community. The idea came from our patient advisory committee, and that's why we're here available on a weekly basis. And again, as Alison and Catherine was mentioning, we really work as a team. We collaborate questions, you know, we ask the experts if we need to pull in additional expertise to answer the questions. And again, we try to do our best in collaboration with other groups as well. So don't hesitate to reach out. And these webinars are actually recorded, and we post the recordings and the slide decks on our website. Feel free to circulate all of these on social media. Everything is publicly available. Again, check out our website. We also have some special series as part of these webinars. We had 4 webinars in collaboration with the scientists and the researchers from different companies that are developing the 4 drugs that we are testing as part of the trial. They gave a webinar with us as part of this series on those dates listed on the slide. The recordings are available. So if you have any very specific questions about the mechanism of action of or the science behind any of these drugs, chances are that we cover those questions and really explain all the details during those webinars. So please feel free to refer to those webinars. And now, if you can go to the last slide, I do want to point out that we love to receive webinar ideas. In fact, we are working on developing new content for these weekly webinars. We want to continue to keep them informal and also obviously have plenty of time to answer your questions, but we also want to provide new content. We are thinking about having a few webinars on biomarkers, and the reason for that is that we received a lot of questions about biomarkers during these weekly webinars. So we really want to bring in guest speakers for short presentations, nothing too boring or demanding, but something that's really practical and helpful to answer some of the questions that have come up on these webinars. Having all the experts on the line, and again, they will be recorded, so you can always circulate if other people have questions or refer back to that. We're also gonna work on some topics that relate to biostatistics and trial design, because many of you have asked us very good questions about why are certain inclusion-exclusion criteria selected? Why do we still have placebo? How do you make a choice about going into open label extension, etc.? And so these are all very important questions, and really they really leverage lots of collaboration and input from many different stakeholders, and they require some statistical knowledge to really understand how this works. And so we are partnering with our statisticians to have a webinar series on that. Also, we want you to get to know our sites. Oftentimes, we have questions on this webinar about this particular site or that particular site. So what we want to do is that, as you know, we are working in collaboration with many sites from across the country. So we're going to have a series of guest speakers. Every week, we're going to have maybe a site PI, a site investigator, or a member of the staff, so that really we can travel from state to state. And then, obviously, you can basically ask questions, and we'll try to announce that on social media so that maybe people from a certain area can try to attend if their area is covered on that particular week. So again, send us our webinar ideas. For full disclosure, when we prepare new slides, we need to have them approved by the central IRB, which is the ethics committee. So there's going to be a little bit of a lag, I guess, between sending the idea and us being able to have the slides approved. And that's how clinical research works, for good reason. So everything is vetted by a larger committee to make sure that the level is appropriate for again, for public use in the context of the clinical trial. So so again, send us your ideas, and for now, I think we can just take the questions.
Okay, so I accidentally minimized my screen here. Okay, so the first question that came in today, somebody's asking, I think, about the eligibility criteria. So the question is, why can my son not join a clinic since he has lower but not upper ALS?
Yes, so that's a great question. And again, it goes back to the point of trial design. Why do we have certain trial design characteristics for this trial? So I just want to point out that the goal of the trial is to be able to test and develop these drugs as quickly as possible for all people with ALS. So the goal of having certain criteria is to be able to answer the scientific question as quickly as possible. The scientific question is, does this drug work or help all people with ALS? In order to do that, we need to restrict the criteria to people who have roughly similar characteristics or within certain, certain boundaries, because those people will tend to progress at a similar rate, which helps us answer the question in a faster manner. In other words, if we were to take people who are too different from each other, it would take us a larger trial and a longer trial to get the answer. And so I think really this is the particular criteria that we have are a balance to be able to enroll as many participants as possible. Unfortunately, not everyone is eligible, but also be able to answer the question as rapidly as possible. And then once we answer the question, the drug will be applicable to everyone. With respect to your specific question of not having upper motor neuron signs, again, obviously we would need to see exactly with your physician what the exact sort of presentation and physical exam is. But essentially, there's a subgroup of people that have motor neuron disease that only have lower motor neuron signs, never develop upper motor neuron signs, and they tend to have a slower progression, which is obviously, if that's the case, again, I cannot comment on the specific case. This would have to be discussed with your physician. But, again, we cannot include people who have a predicted slower progression than average, because otherwise it would take us longer to answer the question and test the drug. And we can, perhaps, feel free to contact Catherine if you want to have a more detailed discussion about this.
And another question here is, when do you expect the expanded access program to begin?
Yes, so we didn't really cover it in the presentation. Maybe we could make that a topic for a future webinar to spend a little bit more time on EAPs. But essentially, we are going to, we plan on starting to enroll participants in the parallel EAP program that we're going to launch in parallel to the platform trial. We're targeting the second quarter of 2021. So again, over the next 3 months or so. The timelines are not fixed. I do want to mention that EAP is still a research trial. And so at this stage, we have a developed protocol and processes, but we still need to get all the permissions in terms of IRB, ethics committee, FDA, etc. So it's still set up as a research trial. In other words, we cannot just prescribe the drug. So we need to get all those permissions.
Another question here is, why is it that once an open label strength test is no longer necessary?
That's a great question, actually. So we did discuss that, and there's a couple of reasons for not including it. So number one, it requires in-person visits. And so because the open label extension is long and we're still in the pandemic, we wanted to sort of reduce the number of procedures that require in-person visits to really the minimum possible. So really every time we select a schedule of activities, we really try to think hard about, balancing the data, but also the time it takes for participants to participate. It's not a super demanding procedure, but it takes some time and it does require in-person visits. So we try to really pare down to the data that could be most informative without, again, trying to respect participants' time and effort and travel. So that was one of the guiding principles. The other thing is that over time, again, it's we already have a good curve during the 6-month period, and that's when we can really compare to placebo. The open label extension is long term, and we don't really have a placebo group to compare to. So we really wanted, again, to pare down to the most informative outcomes. And that's why we basically reduce the number of procedures, and then we keep the primary outcome, which is the ALS-FRSR or the functional rating scale, but we removed some of the additional ones, which are still very important to learn about the drug in the 6-month randomized period. But again, more long term are less important.
Then there is a question here about where should we send the suggestions for webinar topics, and I can go ahead and answer that, where that's a perfect example of when you can email me. So if you have questions that you want to submit prior to the webinar, or if you have suggestions on topics you'd like to see covered week by week, you can email that Healy ALS platform at mgh.harvard.edu.
Great.
And somebody is asking here, when do you expect the enrollment to be complete?
Yeah, so because this is a perpetual trial, all the different drugs, the different regimens are, they're going to continue to go, and some of, the different regimens will be staggered a little bit. So if you're asking about the first 3 regimens, testing the first 3 investigational products, those started, last summer, as you know, and we expect to essentially finish enrollment this year, with the expectation that then we will have the results of the randomized period, which is 6 months long, towards the end of the year, 2021. Now for the regimen D, which is the 4th one, that started more recently in January. So again, you have to kind of factor that in. So it's still kind of enrolling very well, but obviously started 6 months later. So again, all of this is going to be essentially on a rolling basis, but specifically for the first 3 regimens, we're very excited that, if enrollment continues to hold despite the pandemic, again, we should have the results by the end of the year, or at the most kind of early next year. But again, we were still on track to see results. The pandemic is always a little bit unpredictable, but hopefully, fingers crossed, that we can continue to enroll. Yeah.
And this next question actually is a perfect segue. So when do you expect to look at the results for the data, and when do you expect you might see an efficacy signal?
That's a great question. And again, that's why we want to do a series of webinars on biostatistics and exactly how sort of the trial science works, and, how the FDA process and all of those kind of, technical details. But essentially for now, so we can only so we don't look at the data in real time, other than for safety. We have an independent DSMB, which is basically a data safety and monitoring board that independently sees the data in real time to make sure that there's no safety problem, and to make sure that there's nothing really extraordinary going on in either direction, either extraordinary efficacy or extraordinary danger, right? And so essentially they're always monitoring the trial in real time to make sure that if there is a need for immediate action, they can get started with that process. However, for us, in order to protect the scientific integrity of the trial and not bias the results, the only way to really analyze the results as a whole is at the very end of the trial. And what do I mean at the very end? It's not the very end for the individual participant, it's the end of the group. So for example, for regimen A, or for the first drug, we need to wait until every regimen, every drug is tested in 160 people. So we need to finish enrolling all 160 and allow all of them to be in the trial for 6 months, because that's the length of the randomized period. So after the last patient is enrolled, we need to wait 6 months for the last patient to finish the randomized trial. At that point, we collect all the data that's being collected. Obviously, we continue to collect it, but we sort of put it together. We do something called database lock. So we kind of clean and sort of, finish the database. And at that point, when we have all the data in, we can analyze. So that's why, basically we need to, it's important to enroll. It's important to continue to have good enrollment, because the sooner we finish enrollment, the sooner the clock starts, basically with the last 6 months, and then we can see the results.
And someone is asking if OLE, so the open label extension, if that ends after a year, is it possible that there would be a period of time where the drug is not available until it's approved by the FDA?
Well, I mean, the commitment that we have is to really do everything that's possible to continue that access until the drug is approved by the FDA. Again, I cannot promise for sure, because it always depends on drug availability and manufacturing, but that's the intent. So the intent is basically to continue to provide access until either we know that the drug does not work. In that case, obviously we would stop the open label access, because that there's no point, or hopefully until we know that the drug works, and then the people who are on drug at that time, when we learn about the success of the trial, will remain on the drug until the drug is on the market. So that's kind of what we are intending to do.
At this time, do we know how many people have finished and are currently in open label?
That's a great question. I don't remember the exact number. I believe it's about 30 people or so, but again, don't quote me on that. There's sort of a group, the group that started in the summer of 2020. By now, basically between January and March, we have a group, the first group of people that is now on open label extension for all 3 regimens, the first 3. And then for the 4th, that started in January. So you have to the first person to go on open label for the 4th regimen will be January plus 24 weeks later, they'll go on open label extension.
And while we're talking about open label extension, so once somebody completes the trial for one drug, can you obtain open label access for a different one? Or alternatively, be randomized again for an opportunity to participate in the trial for one of the other 3 experimental drugs?
Yeah, so for when somebody finishes the randomized period, they do have the opportunity to rescreen and sort of restart the trial all over again. And so you would be assigned to any of the other drugs. So if you were assigned to the first one and then you rescreen, you can be assigned to the remaining ones. Now you still need to be eligible for the trial. So that's a path that's open basically to people that are still eligible for the main trial, because it's almost like restarting all over again. Now the open label extension is an option. Because we don't want people that, for example, are no longer eligible for the trial to not have anything, available. And people might have been on placebo, obviously. So we want to give everyone the chance of being on active drug. Now, the open label extension itself, I just want to point out, it's for access, but it's also a very important scientific trial. So essentially, it's very important for us to capture long-term safety and efficacy data. So it's still very much part of the original trial. In fact, for a drug to be approved, there are some regulations about the number of people that have, they need to have received drug for a certain period of time. So it's very important especially for these newer drugs, that we have a large enough number of people that have been exposed to the drug for long enough in order for us to really gather the required safety information. So it's very much part of the trial. That's why this is very important, and we really encourage people, if they want to go on open label extension. Because of that, we cannot allow people to sort of jump from one regimen to the other, because really what we are looking for is to get long-term data from that particular regimen. So for example, if somebody starts in regimen A, after 6 months, whether they were on drug or placebo, then they start the open label extension for many months. That means that they will give us the opportunity to collect long enough data on that in that entire group, that if the drug is positive, will be enough, again, to support the new drug application. So that's the best way for us to really expedite the drug development process. So I just want to go back to the, why are we doing this trial? This trial is designed to get to new drugs in the most efficient and most rapid way possible. So this is really the driving principle.
And someone's asking about future regimens. So can you talk about the SLS 005 or when that trial will start?
So that's going to start later this year. And actually, we're going to have a webinar, just like we did the scientific webinar for the other companies to sort of, explain that. So more to come on this.
And can you talk about biomarkers from CSF versus blood versus DNA samples? They're asking because a lumbar puncture can have side effects, which, could be less than ideal, but they're looking for some clarity on
No, that's a
biomarkers.
great point. So, and that's exactly why we made it optional. So CSF or spinal fluid is actually very important because you can get some additional information that cannot be obtained from plasma, from peripheral blood. So that's why it's important to have it. At the same time, you're absolutely correct. That's not for everyone. Some people have a difficult spine to work with, or they might be more prone to side effects, or they just may not want to undergo that procedure. And that's absolutely fine. So really, we're not really trying to, we don't want to, again, put anyone in an uncomfortable position. Some people do very well with spinal taps. And so if they're, if they can volunteer for it, that's great. But that's why it's optional. We actually had a discussion about it with our patient advisory panel, and some of them had spinal taps and they had a good experience, and so they said absolutely we would do it again, and other people said I'd rather not do it. So that's why it's optional. It's very important, but we don't need to have spinal fluid from every single person who participates in the trial. Again, even if it's just a small proportion, it does help. It helps immensely, but we just need a few people to provide that additional donation, which is obviously very much appreciated.
Over the 6-month period of the study, if the ALS score drops on average by a point a month, do you have a rough idea of what you're looking to achieve in terms of a positive result for each arm?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and really comes down to the idea of variability in the points. So the famous ALS-FRSR, which is the functional rating scale that we measure every month in the clinic or in the clinical trial, that's very variable from one, can be very different from one person to the other, and it can also, go in kind of have a different slope depending on the month in the same person. So some people might have, a faster slope at some point in their life and a slower slope at other points in their life. That's why it's very hard to predict on an individual basis. And that's why the only way to really tell is to do the group analysis at the end with comparison to placebo. That's exactly why we need placebo, unfortunately, still in ALS, because it's very hard to tell on an individual basis and try to guess, because you don't know what the slope would have been without the drug. So again, that's something that we want to cover in the biostatistical webinars, because it's a very important point.
And I think our audience always catches on to this. So I was saving some of the non-platform trial questions, and we every week get a lot of questions about whether there are updates on AMX 0035. So where that stands, if it might be in an EAP, questions along those lines, if we have any updates for the community.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a general comment, I think obviously we're excited about the results of the AMX35 trial. As you know, there's been a public announcement about plans to submit for a new drug submission in Canada to Health Canada. And again, the company is still working with different regulatory authorities. So I'm sure that there's going to be announcements about it. At this point, again, we don't have any specific additional information, but hopefully very soon.
Then do you have any view on the NU9 announcement out of Northwestern?
Yes, of course, the scientist who developed that, is a close collaborator. It's, these are great news. It is still in the lab. So the data, as exciting as it is, it's still in the lab. So I think we're still talking of, a few years down the line to bring this exciting lab data into the clinic. And I see other questions about sort of a similar topic, so the EPAC1 protein and other kind of proteins that have been discovered recently and reported. I do want to thank you for really following science. That's the most important thing that we all look at science for more insights into the causes of ALS and the mechanisms of ALS. I do want to caution people that when we have exciting getting results in the lab, it might still take time to translate them to the clinic. Having said that, it starts in the lab. So the drugs that we are testing right now were exciting news maybe a few years ago when they were discovered in the lab. So again, I think it's very important to continue to follow the news and make sure that we are up to date. At the Healy Center, we have a committee of scientists that actually is doing exactly that, really surveying all the literature, all the scientific data to make sure that then we can select the best candidates for the next regimens.
What would the time frame be if one of the trial drugs for the platform trial, if it shows that it's beneficial, when would that be available for treatment potentially?
Yeah, essentially, there's a few steps that need to happen after a trial ends, and those steps, include obviously gathering all the data and then submitting a packet for regulatory submission. So that's generally a few months, and the actual path and timelines are dictated by the results and by a number of other things. The FDA doesn't just look at the trial results, but there's a lot of additional information that need to be provided, including toxicology, chemistry, manufacturing, data about the actual compound, the label, the manufacturing, the packaging, all of that. So essentially, all of that comes into play, and the submissions to the FDA are several thousand pages for that reason, because again, it's the trial results, but it's also all the ancillary or additional information.
I'm kind of branching off of this. I'm going to quote directly here. What is the best way to kick the FDA's butt to make newer drugs available?
Well, to be honest with you, I think it's a partnership. I think it's important for the ALS community to partner with the FDA, as they've been doing. There's been lots of meetings. There's been a recent meeting with FDA officials. There's a lot of meetings that are going on to really work as a team. I don't think it's only, one piece to the puzzle. There's many different things that need to work at this, together, sort of, and everything needs to align. And I think everyone is, at least, I know in the academic community, everyone is aligned and really working collaboratively with the FDA. So again, we have had several meetings with the FDA for this particular trial, the platform trial. And so we carefully discuss the design with them. And we know that the design is something that, if the results are positive, is something that, again, is well designed and could actually expedite the next steps. But first we need to get the results, obviously. Yeah.
Someone is wondering if the Treg work in Houston would possibly come to the Healy trial.
Well, I'm glad you asked. Actually, there was a webinar at NILS, I guess yesterday or the day before, where Dr. Appel and Dr. Berry explained sort of the status of the Treg work. So I would encourage you, for those of you, maybe, I don't know if you can put it in the chat, Catherine, the NILS.org is the website of the NILS ALS Consortium. I really want to encourage you to go to their website and check out all the webinars, because they will explain exactly, here we're focusing on the platform trial, but there's many other trials, such as the Treg trial. And so please go online and check the link to the educational webinars are freely available, to the community. And specifically, again, we don't have a timeline or interaction specifically in terms of the platform trial, but again, there's a lot of collaborative work going on with Dr. Appel.
And so I did share that link to the NILS website, where they have an educational webinar series where they record them, post them online. I'm not sure, Dr. Appel's talk yesterday, they might still be in the process, but when it is ready to be uploaded, that will be the link where you can find it.
Excellent. And I see a couple of last questions. One question about cord blood stem cell therapy. I don't think there's any active program on that, but again, feel free to contact Catherine and we can look it up for you. I think, again, there's obviously some stem cell work going on, but I don't think there's any active program where people can use the cord blood specifically. And then there's another comment about sort of, the relationship between the ALS Association. I think it's, can you read the quote, Catherine?
So it seems as if ALSA doesn't approve of a drug or sponsor it, then the FDA doesn't approve of it either. Do you have any thoughts about that?
No, I really don't think we can make that conclusion. I mean, I think, again, everyone is doing their part in trying to evaluate the drugs, and then it's a discussion. So I think really, again, I wouldn't come to that conclusion. Yeah.
And I think that is all. And there's a very nice comment in here thanking us. So thank you guys for
Thank you.
attending too.
Thank you so much. Thank you for attending, and we'll see you next week. And again, we'll start with a series of guest speakers to mix up the topics, and hopefully we can advertise on social media what the speaker of the week will be. Okay. Okay, great. Thank you so much.